Markets continue to tumble as Trump doubled down on his sweeping tariff agenda. The president made new threats against China on social media just hours ago. Those threats include an additional 50% tariff against that country. Now, that Truth Social post reads, quote, if China does not withdraw its 34% increase above their already long-term trading abuses by tomorrow, April 8th, 2025, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50% effective April 9th. Additionally, all talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated. All right, CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes has the very latest from the Trump administration. But first, I want to bring in CBS News senior business and tech correspondent LIng. Jolene, thank you so much for being with us. Markets in China closed right now. How do you see this latest announcement from Trump playing out over the day?
It looks like it's going to continue to be volatile and very challenging for investors because there's so much uncertainty out there. A lot of folks are just following what is happening hour by hour, even minute by minute. But we do know that in terms of how much you pay for consumer goods, that is really what matters to not only consumers, but small businesses as well, right? And we have some new information from Oxford Economics that shows that the average retail price of goods could go up by about 10%, which of course would be a really challenging additional amount of money to pay for goods, especially after such a long sustained period of stubborn inflation, higher interest rates, and of course, just coming out of that pandemic 5 years ago. So the overall situation for small businesses, what we're hearing is because there's so much uncertainty, it's been difficult to figure out what to do, to how to absorb the costs of these tariffs. And so that uncertainty continues to play out and create that volatility that you're seeing often, much of it today, once again in the red.
So, Jolene, what would it take to sort of stabilize Wall Street, at least the remainder of the week? I mean, more tariffs are coming. That's only going to impact the economy even more, right?
Yeah, and we're also getting additional data, economic data. Sure, it was from last month prior to the tariffs hitting, but we're going to get more producer price index data as well as inflation data. That is likely to be more market sensitive, if you will, going forward. But the idea here is businesses, investors, consumers, everyone wants certainty. And we're basically getting the opposite of that right now from the White House as the situation evolves. And so even though President Trump is saying, look, in the long term, he hopes to bring back jobs in terms of manufacturing, right now, the short-term impact is not just on your portfolio, but it is in the sense of how people are spending, softening consumer confidence, things like that impacting the market writ large.
And a lot of folks are sitting at home wondering, what do I do with my money? Should I be investing? Should I be selling? What should people be doing?
It's interesting. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink today saying at the New York Economic Club that, maybe this is a buying opportunity if you're trying to get some good value on some of those more expensive stocks out there. But overall, if you're thinking about your 401k, your retirement, you just want to think about the long term. Ride this out. Historically, the S&P 500 has made gains of 7 to 10% on an annual basis. So if you sit and you don't move anything, you don't take, any risk in terms of, paying additional fees to get cash out, just hold on and stay calm. But it is a different matter for people who are currently retired right now, who are drawing on some of these assets. It is definitely a very stressful and difficult time. But overall, as we look at it, if you are holding, typically, historically, you end up still winning.
Okay, so if you can, hold on. But it is stressful. That's probably the understatement of the century for a lot of people right now. All right, LIng, thank you so much. All right, let's bring in CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, great to be with you. Remind us of how we got to this point with China and these tariffs, and what's at stake here for the White House?
Well, first the president imposed 20% tariffs on China, and then the other day he announced that he was going to add 34% on top of that. That's how you got to 54%, and then unsurprisingly, China decided to retaliate. They say, hey, you're putting an extra 34% tariff on our goods, we'll put a 34% tariff on yours. And then today, the inevitable escalation by President Trump, who had threatened to do exactly this if any countries responded to his tariffs. Now he says he's adding another 54% tariff to Chinese goods starting on Wednesday. Liz, I was interviewing a small business owner who has a comic book store about a mile away from here on Friday, and he imports a lot of his goods from China primarily, also Canada, and he says he doesn't really have alternatives. All of the books that he sells, whether they are graphic novels or comic books, they are printed in China and Canada. So for someone like him, suddenly staring 104% tariffs in the face, most of which will be passed along to him, he has to then decide how much of that he's going to eat, how much he'll pass on to his customers. It is incredibly stressful.
Yes.
And so the question is this a threat? Is this something the president will back down from eventually? We simply don't know right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, Nancy, because the president repeatedly said that negotiations over these tariffs are out of the question. But then he seemingly softened his stance today in a Truth Social post about Japan. What more do we know about that?
Right. He said that there was a top tier group of Japanese negotiators heading here to Washington to discuss the new tariffs on their country, and that he is open to talking. And I have to tell you, this has been one of the biggest frustrations for lawmakers, for the business community. No one seems to understand where exactly Trump stands, where his administration stands when it comes to negotiations. Over the weekend, a lot of his top economic advisors were out there talking about this, and we got differing messages from all of them, whether it was Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick or the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro. And I think the reason that they aren't all on the same page is that the president himself has been changing his mind about whether he wants to engage in negotiations or not, and how soon. And so they're trying to speak for him, but they're struggling to do so.
And meanwhile, Nancy, as you can see, there's a lot of activity going on behind you, because any moment now, President Trump is set to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They're going to walk through those doors at sometime during this hour. They are set to hold their second face-to-face meeting since Trump started his term. And there's a lot of things to discuss, Nancy, everything from tariffs, of course, to the Israel-Hamas conflict. What are we expecting to come out of today's meeting?
Well, this will kind of be a test case for whether the president actually is open to negotiating on tariffs, because he slapped a 17% tariff on Israeli goods. That really took the Israelis by surprise, because they, in anticipating these tariffs, had actually dropped all of their tariffs on U.S. goods. They thought that that would cause them to be safe. It did not. So Netanyahu has been engaged in lower level conversations with other White House officials. Now he's going to be sitting down with the president. So we'll see what comes of the conversation today. But it is not going to be a conversation solely about tariffs by any means. There's so much to discuss. Iran, and of course, the end of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, which has taken place, and now the fighting has resumed. Israel has imposed a blockade on aid into Gaza, and that has had significant effects as well. They say they're doing that to up the pressure on Gaza to release more hostages, but things are not going the way that President Trump had envisioned. So we'll see what comes of conversations about that here at the White House as well.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that press conference later on today. Nancy Cordes, thank you so much.